Hey everybody, welcome to another TubeFix tutorial, and in this tutorial we're looking at thumbnail templates and how to avoid getting your text obscured when YouTube overlays the player elements on top of your video or thumbnail. So it's primarily about text in thumbnails, but you can also use it to avoid getting your text overlaid in the actual video itself. Now, it's not the full story, this is just what we've learned so far, so this is more of an interim tutorial, and I expect we'll update it when we move further forward and learn more about it. And I'll give you a template that you can then use to overlay over your thumbnails and videos as well. And we'll show you at the end of the video or in the comments below how you can get those templates. Let's take a look at what I consider to be a standard layout that I can overlay over an image that helps me position text and images for a YouTube thumbnail template. Also, particularly with the top and bottom bars, it helps you position text within videos as well, so that at no point does the text actually get obscured. So looking across the bottom of the template then, you have the player elements and the progress bar sections. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but that's in essence where you see the play, the pause button and the share icons as well. Now also there are the progress bars in terms of duration, how far you've got into the video. Now these differ in height, so on the template that I'll show you there's two different sections, one for the larger thumbnails and one for the smaller thumbnails, and that depends on where they're actually presented. So then if we look at the top bar, this is where the video title is presented, particularly when a video is embedded within another platform. So you don't normally see this, but it's worth bearing in mind because if someone else embeds your video, if you've got text in that area, it will be obscured by the title of the text or the title of the video when YouTube embeds it into another platform. I think the reason this is done is because if you look at a video on YouTube as a channel, underneath it is the title of the video. Now, when it's embedded, there's no other reference to what the title of that video will be. So it's shown at the very top part of the video thumbnail or overlaid on top of the thumbnail. So then if we look to the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, there's another section where when you're creating your thumbnails, and you've probably seen this, if you have a something positioned in the bottom right-hand corner, sometimes it will get overlaid. So the duration block is down to the right-hand side bottom of the template. Now what I've done here is create a section that allows for the three most common types of duration blocks, or the three most common sizes of duration block. And they vary in size depending on where the YouTube video is presented, whether it be in the YouTube ecosystem or embedded elsewhere. And then lastly we have the play button, which is worth taking into account because on a couple of the thumbnails and videos that I've done, the play button has appeared on top of text, which is not ideal. So let's have a closer look at the duration bar in 3 or 4 instances so that you can see how it varies in size. In the first instance, let's have a look at how it looks on what I call a standard YouTube thumbnail. And you can see in this thumbnail, it's really quite discreet. It doesn't seem to cover too much of the image, but on this particular thumbnail that I did, it seems to sit quite well there. However, it's still positioned over the top of the left of my shoulder. So slightly larger then is the duration block that you can see when it's presented in a slightly smaller thumbnail. And you tend to find as the thumbnail gets smaller, the duration block gets bigger, which kind of just makes sense anyway. Now in this particular thumbnail, you can see the duration block is just encroaching on my collar. So any larger than that and it will start to actually touch my face, which wouldn't be ideal. But you can see in the two there, the first one, it's reasonably discreet, but then in the second one, it starts to get larger. The third representation of the duration block can be seen in the mobile thumbnail. And in this presentation, you can start to see it's really starting to take up quite a bit of real estate. And in this example, you can see it really has moved onto my neck, which is not ideal because it's starting to obscure facial elements of my image. So these are the main three that you need to think about. The first one is discreet, the second one is slightly bigger, and the third one for mobile thumbnails you can really start to see, and you really need to start to take account of where that will show. So the fourth representation of a duration block is where we see it in the playlist thumbnail. Now these thumbnails start to get really quite small, and as a result, as we've said earlier, the smaller the thumbnail gets, the larger the duration block becomes. So you can see here, the duration block really does start to take up quite a bit of space of the thumbnail. And the progress bar is double the height of what you will have noticed in the previous 3 thumbnails. Now, why this is important is because if there are images or text that you positioned on the baseline of a thumbnail, that will be obscured. The smaller the thumbnail gets, the bigger the duration block gets, and on the fourth representation, the higher the progress bars get as well. So it's a good idea to position key images where you need to be able to see all of the images above where the highest progress bar will be. So far then, we've looked at what I'm referring to as a standard template for a layout of a thumbnail, and I've touched on the playlist elements as well. Now that changes what is actually visible for a thumbnail when it's used within a playlist. So let's take a look at the playlist layout and some of the elements that are brought into play because of a thumbnail that may need to be used within a playlist. So in this playlist layout, I've included the overlay that YouTube puts on top of a thumbnail when it's included into a playlist. And you can see that significantly reduces the visible area of a thumbnail and the elements that you would want people to see to encourage them to click that thumbnail. And if you look down to the right hand side, the duration box is much bigger for a playlist video thumbnail. So if you're thinking about using a video in a playlist, you really need to think about how the thumbnail will be seen when you add it to that playlist. And in this representation, you can see that for a playlist, YouTube overlays this significant area where it counts the number of videos within the playlist. And also the duration block is much bigger. So the second template is key for anybody that wants to put videos into a playlist, or you think your video will be added to a playlist in the future. And bearing in mind that other people add your videos to a playlist, I think it should be key that you consider the minimum starting point is as a playlist thumbnail. And I think that's what I'm starting to test over the next couple of months, is using this layout to design the thumbnails. So let's take a look at how using this template has changed the way I plan my thumbnails. This is a thumbnail before I started to think more about thumbnails, and particularly where to position text and images on the thumbnail. You can see in some circumstances the title will be slightly obscured, and this is where I was talking earlier about maybe a text is overlaid when a video is embedded. You can also see that my face would be partially obscured by the duration block, and you can see that the progress bars could affect images on the bottom of the screen, as I spoke about just now. So what could a revised thumbnail look like when taking into account the TubeFix thumbnail template? So here then we can see a revised thumbnail where I've used the playlist overlay, as this video will be part of a playlist. You can see the title's repositioned, my image is positioned left and flipped horizontally. Now you can't flip all images, particularly those that have got words on, because it just doesn't look right. It's reversed. My image will also now not be obscured by the duration blocks of any size, because I'm using the playlist overlay, and that takes into account the really small thumbnail that will be used in playlists. The play button is now over the hat and not the text, which is okay. I've now added the rule of thirds to help with the positioning, and the finished item looks okay. Now remember, this tutorial is about positioning rather than design, so you may not agree with the design, that's fine, but this is more about how to position different elements within the thumbnail. So now let's look at a second thumbnail that I'd done before I designed this template overlay. So this second thumbnail looks okay on the face of it. However, drop in the overlay and we can see where it doesn't work. The title is too far to the top. The M50 will be obscured on playlists. The camera is totally off screen if added to a playlist, and the camera is too low and will partially be obscured in some of the thumbnails. So now let's have a look at what happens when we adjust a previously created thumbnail using the new template overlay. So you can see that I've adjusted the title down. The M50 is brought over to the left. The camera is repositioned to be 2/3 visible in the playlist and centered in line with the lower third. The camera is lifted above the progress bars so as not to clash with it in small thumbnails, and the logo is added to fill some space on the right hand side. So the camera would still clash with the duration block in very small thumbnails, but I've deemed that to be acceptable, just to make room for a large enough size camera. So there you have the completed thumbnail. It's nicely balanced, it looks nice and clean, and using the thumbnail template overlay, it makes this a very straightforward process. I've positioned the lens on the center of the lower third, and the text is all positioned correctly so it won't clash anywhere, and the M50 is now visible, and it just looks like a nice clean thumbnail. I'm really pleased with that. And without the template overlay, I don't think I would have been able to do that. So here in a mobile environment, you can see that the text really works quite well, I think. The camera is nicely positioned in the center, which particularly works, I think, well for a lens. The duration block is nice and clean. It stands out, but it doesn't interfere with any of the components of the thumbnail. And the Canon M50 reset just stands out nicely. So I think just in terms of positioning, using the template has really worked quite well. So now let's take a look at a before and after, because we've specifically used the overlay for a playlist thumbnail. So let's see what the difference is having now planned the thumbnail for something that might be used in an actual playlist. So let's look at the two thumbnails in the center of the block. Firstly, you've got the original thumbnail, and you can see that the camera was completely obscured by an overlay for the playlist, and you really couldn't see the M50 that well at all. I think on mobile that would have been even worse. And the revised thumbnail really does look quite neat. The camera shows just enough, and the text is really quite clear and positioned left of the playlist overlay. So none of it gets obscured by the playlist overlay, and the key elements are visible, or at least 2/3 of the key elements are visible as well. In summary then, the reduced area that we get by using this template is a good thing. It forces you to use fewer words, which is better, and with fewer words you can use larger fonts. The text in the video and thumbnails should be kept above the bottom border, and where you want to always have an image in view and not obscured by any of the elements, you need to keep it outside of the overlaid areas and above the 2 progress bars. Remember, the much smaller thumbnail will obscure an image placed on the bottom of a thumbnail. And remember that others may add your video to a playlist, so it's probably best to use the playlist overlay to lay out your thumbnails. And then lastly, use this overlay just to make sure that you're not putting text in the top and bottom border areas that will get obscured. And this is for the video, not your thumbnails. Right, so let's take a look at the overlay templates that you can download and use in your work as well. There are 4 overlays all in all. The first is a 1920 by 1280 playlist and non-playlist. So they're the options where you have the slightly bigger duration block and the playlist overlays included in that as well. So you get much less space, but it helps you to identify those key places where your graphics or your text could be overlaid with. Second is a 1280 by 720 playlist and non-playlist. And the reason there's different sizes is because the 1920 by 1280 is for use on videos, and the 1280 by 720 is to use when you're creating your thumbnails. So how do you get hold of these templates then? Well, currently you can download them from tubefix.co.uk, and you get to the page by signing up for our newsletter, and you'll find the links on the thank you page. And becoming a patron will give you access to these files as well, and we're looking for other ways where you can purchase these files online, so check out down below in the details for the video. So it'd be great to get your feedback and tell us what you think in the comments below, and if you're liking what you're seeing, well, we'd appreciate a thumbs up as well.